Okay, let's together look at the aggregate planning problem. So in general, the aggregate planning problem will present to you some form of demand and some form of parameters in terms of the type of resources available at your hand. Okay, so in here, this is an example from your textbook called the Rocky Roofing Company. Well, basically, you'll have to start the solution process based on this much information at your hand. Okay, so the first table is presenting you the expected number of demand. We expect that this has been already determined by the marketing people or either through working with the marketing people. And then you have number of available days for each month. Those are things you can look up from the calendar. And you also have all these cost parameters associated with the current operations environment. You have inventory holding cost in case you have additional excessive inventory you need to carry over to next period. I would say the cost here is dollars per month. Okay, and the subcontracting unit cost per unit will be dollars per unit. In case you subcontract to a contractor, that is going to be the cost per unit. The average pay rate is going to be $10 per hour for every hours that your workers work for you. This is going to be the pay level. And overtime pay rate, in case you make them work overtime, and this is the amount of money you are paying for them. And cost of increasing daily production rate. So this is going to be a little tricky to understand because if you do understand the way this is actually presented here, this is actually telling you our production rate is actually determined by the number of people. If you think about it, the production rate is usually determined by the number of people you are hiring. Okay, so let's say if you have 2 people and each person they work 8 hours, and this is the total available hours for each day. So you have a 16 hours each day. Okay, and for every 1.6 hours you make 1 unit. So it means 16 hours divided by 1.6 hours per unit. That will tell you you have what, 10 units per day. That's basically how we got our daily production rate. So the example problem is providing the production rate in a daily basis. It's not providing it in a person level or hour level unit. So you sort of have to think about in order to increase daily production rate, in order to increase this amount, you're basically talking about hours doesn't change, right? This productivity doesn't change. It's basically reducing the number of people you have, right? This is 2 people hour per person. Okay, so that's basically what it is. So it's basically telling you in order to increase daily production rate, that means you are hiring more people. Cost of doing so will cost you $300 per unit per month. So in case you'd like to increase, your production rate to 18 units, let's say this is your target production rate, right? In that case, basically you need to spend 8 times 300, which is $24,000, to increase your production rate. This is additional cost of increase. This is additional cost you need to spend in order to improve your production rate from 10 to 18. So this way of providing information is convenient because you don't have to think about how many people I need to hire. From that sense, it's convenient, but it may not be very intuitive for you. So I thought that it would be nice to break it down so that you can understand it better. And so is the cost of decreasing daily production rate. That means when you're trying to reduce this number, baseline is 2. If you say you'd like to reduce it to 8 units per day, basically it's telling to doing so you are spending 2 times 600, which is 1200 per month, in order to reduce your production rate from 10 to 8, which is a decline of 2. Okay, basically this is what it is. Multiply 600, that's going to give you 1200. That's what it is. So I'm spending a lot of time explaining this as if this is a big deal, but this may be useless, totally useless in your next problem. But the reason why I'm spending time to explain this is because at some point the certain cost parameters doesn't really make sense to you. You have to pause and think for a second, what's the exact meaning of this? And then we move on to the next parameters. It's basically the daily production rate, which is 50. I initially marked as a baseline, but I probably don't like to label it as a baseline. But we'll see why I initially wanted to call it as a baseline. Okay, and the daily production operations hour is 8 hours. So this is gonna be unit per day because it's daily production rate. Daily operation hours is going to be 8 hours per day. And what is it? Labor hours to produce a unit. It takes 1.6 hours to produce 1 unit. So I'm just gonna make it as a per. Okay. So the first question is, please compare the total costs under leveling strategy, subcontracting strategy, and demand chasing strategies. We discussed what's the characteristics of those strategies during our Wednesday class, so I'm not gonna go over this one more time, but I guess you can probably tell by looking at the breakdown of the cost structure. Okay, so let's take a look at the first problem. So there's actually more than one way of completing this problem. I'm not trying to argue that what I'm doing here is the best way of doing this problem. Okay, if you have pretty good understanding about this problem itself and the techniques, which is aggregate planning, you maybe try whichever way that you think it's better. So this is what I'm doing is a pretty generic way of approaching aggregate planning problem. Again, your next problem will be very different the one that we're talking today. Okay, but still, I'd like to remind you that the most important thing here is to understand the solution process. Okay, this is there's a lot of area where you need to pay attention, because any small details will lead to a very, very wrong result. So you want to always remind yourself, does the result make sense to me firsthand? Okay, so from there you can always review 1 or 2 more times in order to make sure it's correct. So we'll begin with this particular set of information, which is provided from the problem description itself. We have expected demand here. We have production days available under each month. So the first thing I would like to calculate is the daily demand. That's the daily demand. So it's very simple. It's going to be division between 900 to 22. Okay, so that will tell us in order to fulfill 900 demand during the January, if we're working 22 days during the January, in each day we need to produce this many units. So because this is not integer number, that I'd like to round it to the nearest integer. So I'm just going to say rounded daily demand. So it's going to be round this number to integer. 0 means 0 numbers after decimal point. Okay, so that will help us round it, and I'm just going to drag it to finish. drag it to finish. And so we have a rounded daily demand. And we also like to know what is our average daily demand. Average daily demand. So I think in my 9 o'clock class I showed a little different way of doing it. But in general, if you think about what's the average daily demand, it's going to be your total demand during 6 months and your total available production days during 6-month period. Okay, so that's simple summation of all the quantities here, and the other one is all the summation of this particular row. So those are not accounting information, rather those are regular units, right, and days. So your average daily demand is going to be this number divided by this number. Okay, so your average daily demand is 50. So from here I can actually infer something very important, because you see the one pattern you can observe here. This is not a very even daily demand. So it's most likely this is going to be your production requirement, but unfortunately your production requirement is not even. That basically means in some month you'll have to make people work faster, some month you'll have to make people work slower, and that is not usually an ideal case for operations management. So at some point we'd like to find a way to even things out, and this information will become very, very crucial. Okay, so yeah, again, if you think about what's the meaning of average demand, that means if you, during this 6 months period, in every month, if you keep up with this production rate, I know this is being labeled as an average daily demand. That means in general, if you target this particular number in every day of your operations, that basically means in 6 months period, all those demand can be fulfilled. Yes, in some cases there will be some inventory overage, in some cases there will be inventory shortage. It doesn't matter, but as long as we keep manufacturing during this 6 months period, and those demand will be able to fulfilled. Okay, so how do you know? The simple multiplication can tell us. Every day make this amount of units, and 124 days, that will help us fulfill all the necessary demand during the 6 months period. Okay, so let's move on. I know that there are other additional sets of parameters available here, and we all discussed already in a earlier section of this video. So first strategy is a constant workforce strategy, which is called a leveling strategy. So the characteristic here is we keep constant number of people, and then we are using a constant production rate because the number of people are not changing. So as a result, in some cases we'll have overage, in some cases we'll have shortage in terms of production quantity. So in this particular strategy, we are trying to utilize the inventory to deal with fluctuation in terms of demand. Okay, so let's take a look at here. So strategy specific parameters usually will not be provided. This is an area where I have created to help you think. So daily production rate. So we just discussed the 50 is going to be the constant production rate you'd like to have in order to fulfill the demand during the 6 months period. So I'm just gonna reference 50 here to use that as our daily production rate. So we'll keep certain number of people enough so that they can make 50 units per day. An average pay rate is $10 per hours, and then labor hour to produce a unit was 1.6, and inventory holding cost is going to be $5 per unit per month. So yeah, it doesn't look perfect, so we're just gonna click here. Go back. Just fix this one so that they look similar. And demand forecasting. Okay. Yeah, let me fix something real quick. Okay, so with the demand forecasting, our demand is all these numbers. Okay, all these numbers. And the supply side, although I'm providing beginning and production, I'd like to add one row here in between. I'll call that as available inventory. That you will see that how convenient to have this particular row. So beginning inventory, we didn't have any beginning inventory. We're just going to put 0 here. In terms of production, our production rate, everyday production rate is 50 here. Okay, I sort of explained the rationale why it is 50 earlier, and the number of days during the January is 22. So we are able to generate or manufacture this many units. And available inventory in that case is going to be the combination of beginning inventory with the actual number of production we conducted during that particular month. The ending is going to be the difference between available inventory to the demand forecast. Okay, so we have ending inventory of 200 that we need to carry it over to the next period. And then this ending inventory will become the beginning inventory of the next month. Okay, and the production wise, it's going to be, again, it's going to be 50, right, at 4 times available number of days, which is 18. Okay, so since I did dollar symbol here, I believe I can just drag it to fill. Right, that's a production. Okay, and our available inventory will follow the same formula with basically the combination of those two. So I guess I can just use those. I can fill those with the same contents. With ending inventory, again, it's going to be the same formula, right? Available minus demand. I'm just going to do that. We haven't completed yet, okay? Remember, the beginning inventory part has not yet finished. So beginning inventory is the ending inventory of the previous period. So like this. So C25 is correctly configured. So I'm just going to drag it to fill. So as you can see that 50 was the average production rate we needed to fulfill all those demand. We got everything fulfilled up until this point. Okay, next part is going to be figuring out the labor cost. So how do you figure out the labor cost? So usually to calculate labor cost, you want to see number of people available, how many hours each people worked, how much money you are paying for each hour. Those are the way we typically calculate the labor cost. But since this problem did not give us any information about how many people they're using, so we sort of have to find a different way to figure this thing out. Okay, so is there any way we can tell what is the total number of hours that we need to pay for our workers? It turns out that we only need to know the number of hours we needed to produce this number of quantities. So remember, for each unit you need 1.6 hours. For each hour you're paying for $10. So I think we can use that information. So for labor, it's going to be production quantity times this, I would absolute reference it, multiply by 10. I'll do that again. Yeah, for some reason it's here. Okay, I hope it's clear to you. So this is number of quantity, multiply by the labor hour to produce a unit, multiply the pay rate. So that will help us complete this part. I'm just going to drag it to fill. And inventory holding wise, this many inventory is being carried over to next month. The cost wise, it's $5, I believe. And then just going to absolute reference it. Okay, let's move on. So in case we're using leveling strategy, it's going to be 100K, 108.5K. That's the number we're looking into. Move on to next strategy, which is the subcontractor with a constant workforce strategy. So in this case, the strategy is we're going to maintain minimum number of workforces, and then whatever amount short that we are going to rely on subcontractors. So we need to determine what is going to be the lowest daily production rate we're going to maintain in order to rely on this particular strategy. So it turns out that this is going to be the 38. Okay, this is going to be the 38. Why 38 is the lowest daily production rate we should aiming for? Because March, that's basically based on the March number. Okay, no any other months required this low production rate. Remember, production rate basically tells us about the information about the number of people working here. So we just need to maintain number of people that can keep up with this particular minimum demand. So with that, I'm just gonna use 38 for our lowest daily production, and subcontracting cost wise is $20, and average pay rate is $10, and labor hour to produce a unit is 1.6 hour per unit. Again, I'm gonna fix this using here. All right, and demand forecast wise is the same. It's all the same. And supply side, so in-house production. So this is the case where we do not rely on the contractors. It's basically going to be 38 multiplied by what? Number of available days. And I'm going to absolute reference this part. Okay, and drag it to fill. And subcontracted production is going to be whatever amount that is short. Okay, whatever amount that is needed in order to fulfill the total demand. So that part is going to be the difference between the demand forecasting to the in-house production. Okay, there's no negative number. So in case negative number exists, that'll be little, that just means more work you need to think about. If negative number show up somewhere, that means there's even excess inventory with that level of production rate. So in that case, we need to consider about the inventory carrying cost. But since we're using the lowest production rate, I don't think we should see the negative number here. And for the labors, it's going to be the same. Quantity times hour absolute referencing with compensation rate absolute referencing. Do that. Okay, it's very simple and straightforward. And subcontracted cost. Subcontracted cost. That's basically number of unit that you are seeking to subcontracting multiply by the per unit cost of doing subcontracting. So doing this. All right. So it looks like it's a bit cheaper than relying on leveling strategy. Lastly, let's take a look at the demand chasing strategy. This is the most brutal strategy where you hire and fire people on demand. Okay, so cost of increasing daily production rate, we discussed what that means earlier, and decreasing it, which is $600, and pay rate the same, 1.6 is the same again. All right. So demand forecast wise, it's going to be the same. And production per day. Let's pause here for a second to think about it. What does it mean by production per day? What is the characteristics of demand chasing strategy? That means no matter what, okay, no matter how you want to handle this, you want to make 900 units for the January. Okay, if you begin with 0 workers, that means you want to hire workers so that you can make 900 during that month. Okay, I don't care how many workers you had at the beginning. I just want to keep exact number of workforce so that they can make exactly 900 units, so that I won't have any excess inventory to carry over to next period. So that is the characteristic of demand chasing. So the production per day in this case, it should be exactly the same with the rounded demand. Okay, it should be the rounded demand. So if you think about how I obtained all these, it was 900 divided by 22. That's basically the daily demand we have to keep up in order to keep up. I'm sorry, that's basically the number of daily demand we need to fulfill in order to fulfill 900 demand over the duration of 22 days. Okay, so for that reason, the production per day should be the same with this highlighted numbers. So let's go. And change in production rate, that means the difference, month over month difference. Okay, so in the first month, we don't consider any change in production because we don't have any information in terms of how many people we began with. So we're just going to leave that as is. For the second month, you see that there's a difference. Okay, there is actually 2 unit decline in terms of their production rate. Again, that means some people have been fired or laid off. Okay, I'm just going to drag it to fill. So another people fired, but 19 people were hired to keep up with this demand during this period, which gave you daily production target of 57. Okay, so in this case, our cost structure is labor. What is labor? Labor is quantity. This is our quantity in this case. Okay, times 1.6 times 10 per hour. Also do absolute referencing. Okay, in case you're wondering, here it is. Okay, and then I'm gonna drag it to fill. And then we should evaluate, is there any cost associated with increasing and decreasing the workforce? So for the first month, it's 0 because we didn't do anything. For the second month, we only have costs associated with decreasing the workforce. So it's going to be ABS, which is absolute value, multiply 600. Okay, I'm going to do that. So I believe this month is also the same. We fired 1 person, and I'm going to drag it just to get to this point. But we need to get rid of these 2 because nobody was fired during these 2 periods. Instead, people were hired. What is it? E64 300 should be absolute referenced. There we go. So we have all the costs obtained. This is what we have. So if comparing 3 different strategies, you can tell that the varying workforce or demand chasing strategy have the most cost, and the subcontracting have the least cost. Okay, so I will stop here. I'll make additional video to discuss the next question.